Eddie Patterson's friends. Plans for a party. Mrs. Patterson and her two daughters, Lucy and Katie, were getting supper in the large, cheerful kitchen of the Patterson house. As they worked, they were talking about Eddie, the youngest of the family. "Saturday will be his birthday," said Mrs. Patterson, taking a golden brown apple pie from the stove. "Just the same, you'll be sorry if you give him a party," Katie told her. "You know, Mother, that something always goes wrong at Eddie's parties. Don't you remember when he turned the hose on the other children and spoiled their best clothes?" "He didn't know they were going to move in front of the hose," his mother said. "Don't you remember when he shot off all the firecrackers at once?" asked Katie. "That wasn't his birthday, though. It was 4th of July, Miss Patterson smiled, as she remembered the excitement of that day. "Don't you remember when—" started Katie, but her mother stopped her. "I remember it all, Katie," she said, "but Eddie is the only one of the family who is still in grade school. The rest of you are all growing up. He will be grown too in a little while. I want him to have all the fun he can while he is still a child." Lucy stopped peeling potatoes. "We'll have the party," she said. "When Mother talks like that, Katie, she has already decided the kind of cake she'll bake." "It will be devil's food," said Mrs. Patterson. "Then devil's food it will be," Katie laughed. "Shall I make light or dark frosting?" "Chocolate," said Lucy. "That is the kind Eddie likes best." "Where is Eddie now?" their mother asked. "Down at the streetcar corner," Lucy said, waiting for Father and Mary. All three of them laughed then. They did not need to look out of the kitchen window to know that Eddie was waiting for the streetcars that would bring home their father and their oldest sister. "It's a habit," Lucy said. "It's not a bad one," said Mrs. Patterson. Habit it certainly was. 6 days a week, in rain, snow, in sunshine, or in twilight, Eddie Patterson sat on a packing box in front of Gannon's grocery. A group of boys and girls always stood around him. "Eddie whistles the birds out of the trees to come to him," Mr. Gannon said as the crowd gathered. Boys and girls of the neighborhood came. Children came from the other side of St. Martin's Parish. Children came from the public schools. Children of many races and religions gathered around Eddie. He never seemed to say much. He listened more often than he spoke. But he gave everyone who spoke to him a wide smile. He never shouted with joy at anyone's coming, but he gave each child who came a smile of welcome. He never led any games, but he never said no when the others asked him to join them. "Eddie's a good scout," the boys of the neighborhood said. The smiling Yim Ki, whose father ran the Chinese laundry, said nothing, but he stood for hours watching Eddie. So did Frank Bell, the boy whose father had been arrested by the police. So did eager little George Washington Lee, whose father worked as a porter on a train. Older people spoke to Eddie too, men and women and boys and girls coming home from work. "Hello, Eddie," they all said. "Waiting for someone?" "Waiting for Mary," he would say until his sister Mary had come and gone. Then, "Waiting for Dad," he would tell them until his father came down the street. His father worked in the car shops, the only big industry of the town. The Pattersons lived in a house that did not look big, but which somehow seemed to have room for them all, for their father and mother, and Dan and John, and Mary and William, and Lucy and James, and Katie and Eddie. Dan once told Eddie that their house had rubber walls, but Eddie knew that his big brother was teasing. Eddie knew that the walls were not made of rubber, but of wood and plaster. Dan and John worked in the car shops with their father. William went to college. He had to ride nearly 30 miles every day to get there. Lucy and James and Katie went to high school. Mary worked in one of the offices at the car factory. "It's a good thing you earn plenty of money," Lucy sometimes told her. "Eddie certainly couldn't do without it." "He never spends it on himself," said Mary. "He always gives it to people who need it more than we do." "He finds odd people," Katie sighed. "He finds people whom other people don't notice," said her older sister. "But they're odd," said Katie. "And what if they are?" asked Mary.